Okay, in this section, we're going to talk about networking, which is how to meet and actually connect with people. Before anything, you must recognize that every single second you are there at the airport, when you're walking down the road, you will always have the opportunity to network. And so remember, people are going to go to a conference because they want to connect. It can happen at any moment. So all you have to do is really be prepared for any interaction, right? Now, this is to say that you have to be aware about your environment and just make sure that the individual you're going to approach or the one that you end up talking to, make sure that they're not super busy, that they're not rushed, that they're not preoccupied with something else. These are things that you just have to kind of take a mental note of going forward because, again, maybe they're in the middle of an interview or they're talking to a recruiter or simply, they're like going to use the bathroom or something. So, just always be a little aware about like the intentions of how things are going and then you should be set. So, what are networking techniques that work? And I have a bunch of them actually, and I think they all are pretty effective. I've seen many results with them, but I'm gonna break down from the bad ones to the best ones, right? So first of all, there's this method called the excuse method. It's very cheesy, and it's always like you ask a question to see where you can like break the ice, right? So it's like, hey, do you guys know where that booth is? Hey, I'm looking for this lecture. Do you know where that is? Hey guys, I'm kind of lost. Always asking for directions or a simple question regarding your environment is very effective to opening a conversation because somebody would respond with a possible answer or maybe, oh, I don't know, but let me check for you. And then, hey, while you're at it, I noticed your tag said this, your badge said that. What are you doing? Oh, you're a musician. Oh, you're an artist. Like it's cheesy. It works, but it's cheesy. And so I'm laughing at this right now because it's like, okay, I definitely use this a bunch of times, and it works. But there are other better methods you can possibly use to have a more genuine connection, right? And the next method is called the interest method, which is basically, hey, if you two, you and the other person that you're interacting with are sharing the same space watching a lecture, or you guys are headed towards the same direction, you met each other at the same booth, you're making a line at a specific event or activity, chances are they have the same interest as you, or at least there's some level of communicate connectivity right there, and you can use that as an excuse to be like, hey, so this booth looks really interesting, right? Or like, oh, I can't wait to get the signature over here, right? And you can just pop up a normal conversation with the person like, oh, so what brings you here, like why are you interested in this area, right? And this works really effectively when it's a more casual setting. So the more yeah, it just the more casual it is, the easier it is to proc this up. But sometimes some conventions are a little bit like more professional in the sense that like it's very like work related, so it's like a little bit difficult to say, oh, so you're interested in aeronautics as well. That's so interesting, right? Like things like that. So that is, it works, but this has to work in the context of the environment that you're at, what you're doing, and just something that you and the other person share in common, assuming it's the same space, right? The next method, which is very effective, is when you use your friends or when you branch onto the conversation that your friends are having, right? So let's say you have a group of friends that they're currently talking with another group of people, right? And then your friends can pivot and say, "Oh yeah, by the way, it's my other friend over here. Why don't you come over?" And then they kind of like synthesize you into that conversation. And before you know it, you are vibing with your friends, you're vibing with the other group of people, and you're basically networking just by talking with them. So that's something that's very effective. It works really well. And this is where I'm not saying it's a necessity, but it would be a great requirement for you to go with a group of friends whenever you go to any type of conference. Technically, you can go alone, and there's no issue with that, but this method just works really well. Now, I'm going to give you the foolproof, the ultimate icebreaker. This is like, if like this is the strongest one. It's so dumb because it works like 99% of the time. The only time it doesn't work is like if the person genuinely is like not ready to have a conversation. That's it, right? Which is also very unlikely considering that they're there in the convention. And it literally comes down to the actual conference itself, right? So it could be an engineering conference, it can be a meetup, but let's say GDC, for example, right? In the game developers conference, what are you possibly going to talk about? Oh yeah, games, right? So you can literally say, hey, what have you been playing? What's your favorite game? What are you making? What are you working on? Anything related to game development is something that is like the core reason why people are there in the first place. So literally by asking the question of like, oh yeah, so like you're making a game, right? At the game developer convention, like you're gonna get a response. You know what I mean? So it's like there's no way that you fail using this method, right? Again, the only way that it doesn't work is simply because someone is rushed, busy, they're preoccupied with something, or like genuinely they just don't want to talk to you because X, Y, Z, whatever. Bad impressions happen, right? But this is like if you are going through the convention and if you can't ask this question once, you're doing something wrong. Okay. So again, if it's engineering, it's like, oh, so what type of engineer are you? Or like, what are you studying? Like, it's so high level, it's so basic, it's so easy to enter. There's no excuse. Okay, so those are the four methods, right? The excuse me, the cheesy excuse ones, having the same interest, using your friends, and then literally just talking about the convention itself. Right now, you might be saying, "Hey, hold on, I'm shy. I'm introverted. I'm like not good at breaking the ice." I got you. Okay, you got to use the foolproof method. It's that simple. Super easy to do. Okay, just a super simple question. But here is what I call a very unique theory that will help you gain a mindset of like, hey, I'm going to communicate with this person whether I am shy, introverted, or uncomfortable. Okay, and let me describe to you this very carefully. Imagine around like 500, 600, like centuries ago, right? Like years ago, we're talking about like a huge gap of time. We had a king, right? And this king had a castle, and like that, this king had servants, and a bunch of like royal access features that the king can have, right? And every single morning, no matter what, the king has to get up in the morning, sit down, and use the toilet. End of the day, every single human has to use the bathroom. Okay, it's that simple. And I'm not saying this to like demeanor anybody, but once you truly recognize that, bro, we're all human. We all take a dump in the morning. Like, we're all in this together. Like, there's no need to have fear with anybody else when you recognize, hey, like, we're all literally designed the same way. So, like, if I have that consciously in the back of my mind, it's not that I'm better than you or you're worse, or it's just like, bro, you and I wake up, we have our necessities, like we're even. You know what I mean? And if you really lock that in, there's no need to be intimidated by somebody, because again, they're just like you at the end of the day. They're a developer, they are an artist, they are someone that is trying to learn, trying to gain experience, or trying to connect with people. And it just comes down to the fact that we're all human, at the end of the day. Now, let's say that still doesn't register in your mind, and you're like, well, that's belittling. Maybe I shouldn't think about that. Okay, cool. Do the mission orientation mindset, which means no matter what, no matter how uncomfortable you are, no matter how weird the situation is and everything, you have a mission, you have a duty, you have a responsibility to learn more about people, connect with them, and just talk to them. Whether that's outside your comfort zone or not, it kind of has to dismiss your emotions, right? So maybe you do have strong feelings about feeling certain ways of how you're interacting with people, but you just have to dismiss it no matter what. And again, this is all easier said than done. It's a practice, it's a skill. I completely understand that. But these are just some of the methods you can use to easily and cheesily excuse yourself into talking to people, right? And so, there are other considerations to keep in mind, like, hey, what are things that I should be aware about, right? And I would always say that when you are talking to the person, always try to be as respectful as possible. And to have a good conversation is to ask a lot of questions, right? But also, a very important thing, and I'm very guilty of this personally, is don't interrupt the individual. When they're speaking, the thing is they're probably going to be very excited sharing their project. And so as a game developer, you probably want to talk about your game. You probably want to talk about your process, your team, where you're from, your background. There's a lot of excitement that you're going to have within meeting somebody new and genuinely connecting and talking over, something you're hyper passionate about, right? And so that being said, you are going to realize that your emotional state might be a little bit more volatile than usual. And this is simply because you're excited or you're just on high energy. Totally fine. In your best behavior, in your best possible way, simply try to stay best composed. Stay composed, stay calm, ask questions, take your time. Because another thing is, you're going to realize that when you're talking to somebody, you will always feel like you're at a rush when it comes to being in a conference, because again, there's always an event coming up, there's always a lot of people, limited time, limited space. So you don't I'm not saying, stick with somebody for an hour and keep chatting with them, right? But definitely, like, take your time, listen to them, ask questions, be considerate, be genuine, don't interrupt. And then, of course, you can have your turn to also share after you listen to them. But do it in a place where it's honest, transparent, and again, just like calmly, right? The other thing is, when it comes to sharing your work, you can easily overwhelm or like overshare what you do to others. So you got to like be a little bit careful with that, right? Because I can sit down and say, oh yeah, I made a game and I made another game and I made a book and I did this and I have music and I made it. There's a lot of information that people are going to get when they're communicating with others, right? You might want to, say something strong, right? Like, oh yeah, I made a game before and it was really fun. Or, maybe you do want to give more context for that. But at the same time, you just really have to realize that, if the person you're talking to is actually engaged in the conversation with you, that, that's a sign of like that they're interested in learning more, and that's fine. But when I say try to get their consent, it's more about like read the room, understand like, do they actually want to listen to me? Okay, cool. Or maybe they're in a rush. And I'm not saying that nobody does not want to listen to you, but again, in the context of a conference, there's so many activities going on that you're always going to feel rushed. So again, take your time. Don't really like press the other person about every single piece of content that you worked on and everything, but give some highlights, let them know what you do, and if they actually ask more questions back and if you keep the conversation going, then yeah, you can reveal more as you go. So again, composed, calm, take your time, see what happens, right? The next thing that you can do is in your conversation, if you're able to provide utility towards them, they will appreciate you more. I'm not saying use people, right? But here we're trying to network for a reason as well. We're trying to just learn more about others, opportunities, all of these great things that can happen. But utility plays a big role. If you can provide value to somebody, resources, connections, anything that can help someone out in their situation, again, they will view you as someone that they can appreciate, and maybe they want to like spend a little bit more time, possibly to get more out of you and such. But the idea is you just have a easier time connecting when you have the ability to provide a service for somebody. So, always keep in mind that hey, like the more you help somebody, the better chances you'll have with, connecting with them, right? The next part is a little interesting because a lot of conventions have different ways of how they do their formats, right? So the reason why I keep mentioning engineering conventions in particular is because it's a very professional environment where there's like a lot of work related stuff. You have like a lot of people in the industry who they're very experienced. There's a lot of experts, but typically how they communicate is like a very professional level, right? GDC, super fun, super great game developers conference. It's literally about people that make games, right? And I'm not trying to paint stereotypes, but it's more relaxed because you just have the ability to talk about games, your passion, and then techniques that you're actually using to, better make a game. And so what's interesting about this is that the question itself is kind of framed incorrectly because it's like, hey, should I be professional? Should I be relaxed? End of the day, you just have to be yourself. That's really all it is. So don't ever try to lean into one place or another. Just be yourself. And if you understand that, for example, you're about to do an interview, you're about to do something that requires you to show off your professionalism, well, I would hope that yourself is like very composed and that you don't have to worry about these things. But if you realize that maybe you're a little bit too hyper because it's like a really exciting event and such, then yeah, there's going to be those moments where you have to take a step back and kind of just like take a deep breath and say, maybe I need to calm down just a little bit and like express my words a little bit more carefully, try to speak a little slower, get to the point without like being excited, right? And again, if it's too relaxed, then that's fine. But like, you also want to just participate in everything that you possibly can, right? So there's a balance to things, but this really just means, hey, when you're talking to people, again, be yourself, be your authentic self. That's the most important part, and that's the part that's going to make you the most memorable too, because there's no copies of you. There's only one unique person, and that's yourself. So the higher you're able to express that, the better. Hey, you're talking to somebody and you realize that they are the yapper, right? And so that's basically like, hey, how do I avoid the unskippable cutscene, right? And with all due respect, right, you might run into someone that's like hyper excited about something, and you might genuinely be interested in what they have to say, but you have to cut them off because hey, you have a meeting to go to, or hey, I got to really attend this event. Um, I'm not saying make excuses or such, but the thing is, be aware of how much time you actually have when you interact with somebody. If you purposely enter an interaction knowing that you have like 5 minutes left before the next event happens, you're running the risk of having an unskippable cutscene, right? But if you're like, oh, I have half an hour before the next event, I can afford yapping and dealing with quote unquote the yapper. That's fine. You can have fun with that. But even then, let's say like the yapper becomes overwhelming. They keep like talking a lot, and you're like, hey, how do I exit this, right? Again, you're gonna have your pivot methods, and what this basically means is you can have these excuses, and I don't want to use the word excuses, but you want to have the ability to understand that hey, I have things scheduled, I have other events to attend to, I have participations that I have to attend, and you need to leverage that as forward and as like direct as possible. Like, hey, nice to meet you, I only got like 2 minutes real quick, but I want to know more about you, blah 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 blah. And then, oh, okay, cool, this is great, let me get your contact, we'll talk later, and then you move on. And so speaking of contacts, closers, right? End of the interaction would be ideal to collect their contact. Now, it is more polite when they offer you the business card rather than you like forcing it onto them, right? Like if they genuinely had a good conversation, they would say, hey, this was such a pleasure, can I get your business card? Boom, that's great. Now if you say, hey, this is great, here's my business card, you can also do that, and again, depending on the situational context, that could be appropriate. But always try to aim for the other person to give it to you first, simply because it just gives you the signal of like, oh yeah, this works. Like we were great. But if you know that you guys are vibing, everything's fine, that's fine. But if you know that during the conversation, maybe they were a little bit uncomfortable, maybe they didn't like vibe as well with you and such, and there were kind of like some awkward situations, and maybe you actually just don't want to continue talking to this person, absolutely fine. But never force a contact to be distributed like that, right? So always take it easy. And of course, when dismissing each other, say respectfully, like, this was a pleasure to meet you and everything. Can't wait to talk to you soon. Which, by the way, means you have to find a way to follow up. The beautiful part about a lot of conventions, when they tend to have like multiple days, is that you can interact with the same person over again during the week, right? And this is cool because maybe you see them on Monday, you literally don't see them until Thursday, and on Thursday, oh, how's it going? Oh, how's the conference going for you? Oh, you did that? Did you do this? Oh, so, you have more excuses to talk to each other. But also be aware that when the conference is over, it's very important to follow up with your individuals. Like if you kind of just collect the contact and never reach out again, they just become strangers. And the problem with this is that you did all this hard work on networking for what? And I get it, everyone's busy, everyone has their own lives, and it's a very weird thing to keep in contact with like 1,000 people that you're gonna end up talking to, right? But the idea is you just have a simple way to like follow up, say like, hey, I hope the conversation was great. I hope you had fun with the conference. And maybe if they are making content, if they're making a game, like support them, wishlist their game, subscribe to their YouTube channel. Do all the things possible to like again keep in contact with them. And you never know what happens, because in the future when an opportunity pops up and they happen to be involved with it, or if you know that you're getting an opportunity that would benefit them, why not even forward that to them? So definitely these are like the things that you have to be aware about when it comes to networking. But ultimately, the last thing that I'm gonna have to say, and this is very, very important, please be honest. Okay. Ulterior motives are deceptive, but more importantly, they're disappointing. If somebody's reaching out to you, if they're talking to you, and the entire time it's like, yeah, we're gonna have a great time, we're gonna talk, we're gonna do this and that, but then maybe they got your contact and they ended up like looking at you in a different way. Let's say like they were flirting and you didn't feel comfortable with that, or they promised you that you were gonna get this job opportunity and they never reached out. Like don't be dishonest. Be as transparent as possible. Like, hey, I'm here to do this. Nice to meet you. You were great. This is fun. Whatever. But never make anyone feel uncomfortable, because the more the more opportunities you show when someone gets uncomfortable with you, is especially on a conference, you basically give the reputation of the conference like a negative vibe. And if you're an individual that does that to the conference, that's kind of like really bad. So always be in your best behavior, always be composed, but more importantly, just be as honest as possible. All right. So those are my tips for networking in particular. So I really hope this helps. And yeah, we'll go to the next section here.